Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here this morning and this evening. What I'd like you to do right now is think about what incident, what life experience you have had that affects the way you think about time. A memory I'd like to share with you happened a very long time ago. I was just a little kid growing up in Los Angeles, and this was back in the day when phones were mounted on walls. So for all the youngins in here, we didn't always carry around cell phones glued to our heads. Now, at this time, my mom was setting up for dinner, and my brother and I were playing around in the kitchen area. Come on in, have a seat. We were playing around in the kitchen area, and we were not allowed to play with a tennis ball in the house. So the minute the phone rang and my mom left everything on the kitchen table, she headed toward that kitchen wall with the phone, and my brother instantly went to playing with this tennis ball. Now, it's funny how when you're little and you're playing outside on the driveway and your mom opens the front door and calls out, "Helene, Dean, dinner," you can't hear her. Yet in the 20 seconds before she was about to hang up that phone, we knew she was about to hang it up. So we hid the tennis balls and we stood at attention. And now I understand as an adult that when a child stands at attention, that is a clear sign that they are guilty. But this didn't seem to faze my mom, and we figured, oh, it must have been Dad calling again. He's going to be late for dinner the third time in the week. Well, my mom just came over to us, stared at us funny, and said, "Get in the car." Well, when your mother looks at you that way and tells you to get in the car, you go get in the car. So we ran outside, we got into the back seat, and this is in the days of no car seats, no seat belts, no automatic windows and locks. My brother and I crawl into the back and start interrogating my mom. "Where are we going? Was that Daddy? Are we going out to dinner? What's happening?" She did not say a word. As she started slowing down, we see all these red and blue flashing lights, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. And she pulls over to the side, and we realized, oh, Mom is going to go talk to that group of police officers there. She gets out of the car, and just like in a movie, she's walking in slow motion toward this group of police officers, and that's when we spot my dad. He's standing there with his necktie undone, he's got a blazer over his arm, and he's talking to this group of police officers. He and my mom come back to the car, and immediately we start peppering my dad with questions now. "Daddy, what happened? Were you in an accident? Did you get arrested? Are we gonna go out to dinner?" My parents looked at each other, my mom nodded, and my dad proceeded to say, "Do you remember my boss, Mr. Vern? He asked me to drop him off after a late meeting, and when he got out, I didn't realize that the car door was unlocked. At the next stop sign, a man jumped into the car, held a gun to my face, and told me to drive to this intersection, and this is where he got out." So my brother and I were just in awe. "Oh my gosh, you met a robber? Did he say anything to you? Did he leave anything in the car?" We didn't understand how serious this was, even though my dad was sitting there with a small cut on his face and dry blood from the gun being held to his face. Now you would think from this experience, we learned to make sure the doors are always locked and always to be very observant when you're sitting at an intersection. But the more profound lesson actually happened later on that evening, when my parents were arguing in the living room when they thought that we were asleep. And I can hear my mom's voice coming out from the living room. "What do you mean you're working late again? You work late every single night. And it's not just you. I've talked to Chet, I've talked to Kay, I've talked to Christine. Your whole department works late. And then you guys drag back to work the next morning. What is the point of that? Don't you want to see your kids grow up?" 20 years after that, when I'm standing in the supply room at my first job, I had a flashback, not to the police lights and not to the cut on my dad's face from that gun, but to my parents' argument about time and how much time my dad was losing away from his family. My fiance and I, at the time, who's now my husband, he and I had just had that same argument the night before, because I was working 13 and 14-hour days and I'm never home. I'm always coming back to the apartment totally dog-tired, and then having to get up early the next day. I was too young to understand how to communicate with my coworkers, how to make things better, how to streamline everything at work. And I didn't understand how to negotiate with my supervisors and how to come up with solutions and present it to them. But that was 20 years ago. And I have learned since then how to do all those things. So you don't have to go through all the arguments that my mother and father went through all of those years. And tonight we will be going through the 3-prong framework for breaking the time management encryption, and that is the CIA. Now, I want to tell you about a client of mine named Chip. Chip owned a fast-growing technology company. He was built like a linebacker. He was about 300 pounds, 6 feet tall, but the biggest teddy bear. He never said no to anybody. A client would walk in and ask for help, he would drop everything. One of his employees would come in and ask for help, he would drop everything. He got to work before everybody else, and he stayed late after everybody else. The guy was so busy that he never got up from his desk, except for the occasional bathroom break. But he would sit there camped out at his desk, and he would have his candy bars, his canned food. He never left. When he ran out of packaged food at his desk, he would just order takeout because that would save time if he never left his desk. Well, one day we're sitting in the conference room having a meeting, planning an event, when all of a sudden we look at him and he turns white and then green, and he grabs his chest and said, "I think I'm having a heart attack. Somebody call 911. We called, he was taken to the hospital, and the ER doctor told him, "I don't understand how you are alive. Your blood pressure is through the roof. You should have been dead before you've gotten here. You have got to cut back on stress. You've got to cut back on work." Well, that sent him into a frenzy, and you probably should not tell somebody who has nearly had a heart attack that they need to cut back on work, because how do you make that happen? Well, with Chip, we need to start with the C in CIA, which is create clarity. A lot of people want to go tactical first. They want to know all of the hacks, all of the shortcuts you can use with email and on the computer. But you actually need to start with the strategic. How many of you have seen the movie Aliens? The second one in the Sigourney Weaver series? This is the movie where she finally makes it back to her home planet, and just as she's recovered, the powers that be come in and say, "You'll never guess what happened. Remember that planet you ran away from 57 years ago, and you spent all those years in a deep space leak making it back home? We can't get hold of the colonists, and we can't figure out what's wrong." So she agrees to go back with a group of Marines, and fast forward, they land on this planet. They've got aliens with razor-sharp teeth and jaws, clawing people, killing all the Marines, and finally they're down to just 6 Marines in Command Central. Bill Paxton's character, Private Hudson, he's in there whining, "What are we gonna do? We're all gonna die!" That's my best Bill Paxton impersonation. Now, Sigourney Weaver, Ripley, takes a step back, she takes a deep breath, and she said, "Get me specs, get me grids, get me blueprints. We have got to come up with a plan." And she understood that before going tactical, you have to be strategic. You have to have an idea of what the entire picture is like so you know which tactics to use. So in creating clarity, the first thing that you want to do is determine what your top 3 personal goals are and your top 3 work goals or priorities. Now you might be saying to yourself, "Duh, I know what my priorities are," but here's the thing. Our priorities usually rest in our subconscious, and we don't think about what those priorities are until somebody asks us, "What are your priorities?" So that's why it's very important that you have those priorities not only in the forefront of your mind, but you have them listed somewhere on your phone, on a sheet of paper, in your closet, at your desk. You have them listed somewhere where you can view them every single day. Because time management is truly all about mind management. How you use every single minute of the day depends on the decisions that you make. And how you use your time, the things that you work on, those should support those top 3 work priorities and those top 3 personal priorities. Too many times we end up working on the low-hanging fruit because it's very easy to do, and you can get away with just checking a few things off the list. But instead, we should be working on those high-value tasks, and we forget what those are because we tend to work on whatever has just been plopped in front of us, either by text or by email or by somebody walking by our desks. That's why it's very important that you have those top 3 personal priorities and those top 3 work priorities visible. Because when you get down to working on a task, you need to ask yourself, is working on this right now going to support those top priorities? If not, then it's something that can be worked on later. Once you have these priorities, you next want to develop targets. Too many times I hear clients say, well, I want to have higher customer service ratings, or I want to spend more time with my kids in the evening, or I want to have higher uptimes on all of our websites. That's great, but those aren't measurable. You need to have measurable targets with numbers. What scores do you want on those customer service surveys? What percentage of time do you want those websites to be up? How much time do you want to spend with your kids in the evening? 30 minutes? 90 minutes? You need something that's measurable. And the reason why measurable is key is because we lose a lot of time beating ourselves up for thinking we haven't reached a target. But how do you know how close or how far you are if you don't even know what the bullseye is? That's why it's very important that you have measurable targets, both for your work priorities and for your personal priorities. Another part of creating clarity is practicing self-care. That means getting enough sleep at night. How many hours of sleep is the average adult supposed to get? 8. And the research varies 6 to 8, but when a lot of folks out there are only getting 4 hours of sleep at night, that's not close enough to the 6 to 8 hour average we're supposed to get. When we sleep with cell phones by our beds and those phones vibrate during the night, we don't reach deep sleep. And that 6 to 8 hours needs to be deep sleep. Because if time management is all about mind management, your brain has got to be able to function the next day. It's getting enough sleep, drinking enough water, making sure you exercise. Chip, my client who I was telling you about, he would sit in a desk for 12 hours a day. Cardiologists hate that because that's so bad for your circulation. You're supposed to be getting up at least once an hour. Neurologists don't like that because you're supposed to get up and walk in order to stimulate the brain. So if you're sitting at your desk for long periods of time, your brain is unstimulated and your blood is not circulating, so basically productivity starts to shut down. So with Chip, he thought, the longer I work, the more I can get done. But in actuality, that's not what was happening. He was getting less work done over a longer period of time because the brain would shut down periodically during the day. And he wasn't able to do a good job on those high-value tasks. It's actually better to work fewer hours during shorter spurts of time. Working for 90 minutes, taking a 30-minute break. Working for a couple of hours, taking an hour break. You will be more productive that way than working for 12 hours straight. Which means you don't have to work 12 hours anymore because you're not getting as much done as you would if you're working in those shorter spurts of time. So it's very important to create clarity. And this is what we did with Chip. So we knocked down the amount of Red Bulls in cups of coffee he was drinking a day because he was hovering in the 5 to 6 range on those. So we knocked him down to 3 and then eventually down to 1. Whenever he was about to procrastinate or whenever he was feeling stressed, that was his cue to go get a drink of water, go for a quick walk, and then come back to the desk. So after a few weeks of creating clarity, he was starting to make better decisions about how he was using his time and not working those long hours. So the C in CIA, create clarity. Next, the I in CIA, implement, structure, and flow. Implement, structure, and flow. Do any of you remember the television series Monk with Tony Shalhoub? Oh, that was hilarious. Now, Tony Shalhoub's character, Monk, was clinically diagnosed with OCD. He didn't just say he had it, he truly had OCD. And he was so structured with all of his routines and where he placed things that if anybody threw a wrench into it, that was it. He had a conniption fit. It is good to have structure in your day, but not so much that you can't function if anything gets in the way of that structure. Now, on the other hand, you can't just wake up, and I'm from LA, so I'm allowed to imitate surfers. You can't just wake up and say, yeah, dude, I'll just wake up and do whatever, just go with the flow, man. Because if you wake up that way, then you tend to get nothing done. You just chase after those little things and don't get the most important projects finished. Instead, you need to use Bruce Lee's philosophy. Do you guys know who Bruce Lee is? Martial arts expert. He had a philosophy that you need to be water. You put water into a cup, it becomes a cup. You put water into a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Put it into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. Water can drip, creep, flow, or crash. Be water. So you need to have structure, and you also need to have flow. You implement that structure and flow. The average worker loses 3 hours per day from procrastination, distractions, and overwhelm. Oh my, 3 hours a day. Now those are what I call time leaks because it's not like you did all those things between 12 and 3 and then you lost those 3 hours. They're leaks because you do that for 10 minutes over here, 5 minutes over there, 15 minutes over there, and when you add up those time leaks throughout the day, that adds up to the 3 hours. Now, part of the reason why we procrastinate is because we don't have a structure built into our day. We don't know what task to move on to if we don't feel like doing the one that's in front of us. Psychologists tell us that procrastination is the act of wanting to feel better now. It's basically the adult version of a 3-year-old's I don't wanna tantrum. That's what we're doing when we procrastinate. The great thing about procrastination, distractions, and overwhelm, that loss of 3 hours, all of that is self-imposed. And if it's self-imposed, that means we can unimpose it. So, to help ward off procrastination, step 1, you want to develop your 3+3. In the evenings, every single day, you want to develop your 3+3 for the next day. That means the top 3 tasks you need to get done to get ahead in your business or in your job. The top 3 tasks. So we're not talking about, oh, I need to check email and I need to return some phone calls. We're talking about what task in the projects that you're working on is going to move you forward, your top 3. Now your +3 functions in 2 different ways. It can be your bonus 3. So if you finish your first 3 early, then you can start moving into the bonus 3 after you do a little celebration. Yay, crossed everything off my list. But on those days where nothing goes right and you can't work on those top 3 because the internet crashed or because somebody didn't get you the resources that they were supposed to, after you pitch your hissy fit, instead of freezing up in a tantrum, you can say, okay, well, I'm going to move into my bonus 3. And that helps cut out the procrastination. And so just by understanding what it is you need to get done, that's going to help you focus. The other thing that will help you focus is to assign time blocks to those tasks that you've come up with. Do you guys ever have a to-do list with 20 things on there for the day? Or 30? Or 50? We set ourselves up for failure if we give ourselves 50 things to do and it's not even humanly possible to do half of it. And then at the end of the day, you think, oh my gosh, I only crossed 5 things off this list. Well, that's all that was humanly possible. And yet we get down on ourselves because we didn't see the rest of it crossed off. So that's why after you create your 3+3 and you get all of these ideas and things floating around in your brain out of your head and onto paper, for your 3+3 you assign time blocks to them. How long do you think that task should take? 30 minutes? Double it. Give yourself an hour. Because if Murphy's Law happens, you want to be ready to either put out fires, or if a great opportunity lands in your lap, you want time for that as well. So you assign time blocks. Now, if some human or piece of technology gets in the way of you completing something at the time block you've desired, it's okay. This is how you morph your calendar. You move your time block around to either later in the day, or 2 days from now, 3 days from now, whenever you can fit it into your schedule. So it's not falling off your radar, but it's being moved around to a different spot so you can still make sure that you finish it. Kind of like with doctor's appointments. When you have to reschedule a doctor's appointment, it's not like you never go to the doctor, you just reschedule it for a different time. That's what you're doing with these time blocks. Now, the problem with not assigning the time blocks is when something doesn't work out, it tends to fall off your plate, fall off the radar, you forget about it, and it doesn't crop back up again until you realize, oh my gosh, this is due tomorrow. So assign time blocks to all of those tasks that you have. Now, as far as distractions go, if you are highly distracted at work, you want to take a look at your visual surroundings. Because if you're a visual learner, you tend to be distracted by everything that's going on around you. People walking by your desk, the 1,000 Post-it notes you have on the side of the wall, visual distractions, all of the knickknacks that you have out, visual distractions. Now, I'm not saying to have an empty workspace, but just like drinking and eating, practicing everything in moderation, cut back on the knickknacks, cut back on the Post-it notes. If people are crossing your path constantly, try sitting in the other direction. I had a client do that. She used to face out where she had a big window because she liked the scenery. And what she found herself doing was, even when she turned a little to the side to work on the computer, every time she sensed a shadow walking by, she would look up at the person going by. And she lost a lot of time that way. So we rearranged her desk so that way she couldn't see directly out this beautiful window and her productivity increased. So if you're easily distracted visually, take a look at your workspace tomorrow and see how you can make those changes. Now, if you're distracted auditorily, that means with sound, consider wearing a set of headphones so that way you're piping in music that you can work to, or working in a cubicle where there aren't a lot of people around so that way you don't have those sound distractions. So by removing these from your workspace, you will increase your productivity. And for those of you with ADD and are easily distracted and have shorter attention spans, even if you're not medically diagnosed with ADD, we all have some of those tendencies, use a timer. If you set your timer for 10 or 15 minutes, you will be more likely to focus on what's in front of you for that 10 or 15 minutes. And it's better to have that 15 minutes of focus time than 60 minutes of total distraction time. You will get more done in that 15 minutes. Now, the biggest distraction, and this is something that my clients balk at when I tell them about it, the biggest distraction happens to us an average of 110 times a day. Do you know what that is? Yes, cell phones. Our cell phones chime or beep or vibrate at us with a notification that we got a text, a notification we got an email, a notification that somebody liked our post on Facebook. We get some kind of notification. Now, neuroscience tells us that the brain takes an average of 60 seconds to restart every time we switch a task. So every time we allow our devices to interrupt us, we have just lost a minute and another minute. And so if we get an average of 110 notifications a day, we have just caused ourselves to lose 110 minutes in the day. So I highly recommend you turn off those notifications. And I'm not telling you not to check. Just turn off the notifications and decide when you will check. Do you want to check every 10 minutes? Do you want to check once every 30 minutes? Do you want to check once an hour? You decide. You check when your brain is ready to handle it. Okay? Implement structure and flow. Now, since we all know each other oh so well now, what I'd like you to do at this moment is please take out your wallets. I promise this is not a stick-up. Please take out your wallets, for those of you who have wallets with you. And for those of you who carry that green paper stuff, it's called cash. If you have any cash with you, go ahead and pull it out of your wallets. Alrighty. For those of you with cash, what you're going to do is scoot your chairs back just a little bit, and you're going to stand up with your cash. And using your best artistic skills, I want you to create a fan out of the cash. Even if you only have a single piece of money. Create that fan. Very good. 20. You're going to be my best friend. You got a $20 bill. Okay, you create this fan. Now, oh my goodness, almost everybody has cash. This is awesome. What you're going to do is you're going to bend your knee slightly with your fan, okay? And when I say 3, you're going to throw that money in the air. Okay. Ready? 1, 2. All right. I do have to say that, you can go ahead and have a seat. I do have to say that you're one of the more polite groups I have requested that of, because some of the other groups got a little ugly. You guys stood there and gave your fake smiles like, okay, yeah. Whereas the other groups, they started getting sneers on their faces like, we're not doing this. Now, what I'd like to point out is, the second I asked you to throw money in the air, your eyes changed. Every single one of you, even though you put the fake smile on, your eyes said, no, I am not doing this. And yet when somebody asks us for our time, we just automatically say yes. We don't take the time to think about how valuable that time is. We just give it away. And yet, even those of you with just those $1 bills, you had hesitation in your eyes. You were thinking about whether or not it was the right thing to do to listen to that woman up there who said, toss your money in the air. And this is how I want you to start thinking about your time. You are conscious when that money is in your hands. You are conscious about what you're going to do or not do with that money. And that's the same way that you need to think about your time. What are you about to do with your time? How valuable is this task that you're going to do? Do you want to give your time away, or do you want to get something out of it? So think about how you're going to use your time, okay? Now, I'd like to share a Chip follow-up story. He's the one who I started off with explaining about he had the near heart attack, and we had to start with creating clarity. We went into implementing structure and flow. So instead of getting in at 7 in the morning and working until 7 or 8 o'clock at night, we scheduled him for a traditional 8 to 5 day. Since he didn't want to feel like he was completely scheduled the entire day, we scheduled his 3+3 for the mornings and had time blocks for that, and then the afternoon was a total free-for-all. He could do whatever he wanted. And what he discovered is that in the afternoons, he missed the structure of the morning because he felt like he got more done. Even though he felt like he would be really constricted having this schedule, he loved that structure in the morning because he had some kind of direction. When things went wrong in the afternoon, he really wasn't sure what to turn to next because There wasn't a schedule. It was just a free-for-all. So that is something that you could possibly try as well. If you're not willing to do the 3+3 spread throughout the day, try it out for just the morning. He used timers. He had ADD, and we discovered that his attention span was approximately 7 minutes. So we started his timer off at 7 minutes. Set it for 7 minutes, go take a break. Another 7 minutes of work, go take a break. He got more done working 7 minutes at a time than he had on all of those 12-hour days. Because for that 7 minutes, he was focused on whatever was in front of him. So it's not how many hours that you work, it's what you do during that time period with what you're working on.
And the type of breaks where he just would get up and get the water? Or
He would go up and he would go get, yes, and we also set a break, or a timer for his break, because that break might last for 30 minutes or an hour and then you're not being productive. So that it would be Facebook might be a treat, or get on Twitter for 5 minutes, or get on Reddit. Are there any Redditors in here? It's, kind of like Facebook, but not. So he would do that as a treat, or he might work on some of his low-hanging fruit. A task he still needs to get done, but wasn't important enough to make it to the 3+3, but he likes doing it. He might work on that as a break. He would see that as a break. So he just did a variety of things, but he knew that when it was his work 7 minutes, he was focused on work. He didn't look at email. He didn't answer the phone. He just worked. And eventually we increased it. So it got up to 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 15, and he's roughly around 30. I don't think he'll go longer than 30, which is fine because he's doing great at 7. He's going to get even more done at 30. Yeah. All right. Quick story to tell you about bucket list. Who in here has a bucket list? Nobody has a bucket list.
Written list?
Well, at least mental and eventually written. The reason why bucket lists are important is because, remember earlier we talked about those priorities, having your top 3 work priorities, your top 3 personal priorities. It's also fun to have some dream time, and that's what bucket lists are for. About 8 years ago, we had a really terrible experience of watching a very good friend of ours die from colon cancer. That was in August when we were at her funeral. And my husband and I looked at each other and we said, you know what? We can't wait until retirement to work on our bucket list. Life is too short. You don't know what's going to happen. So what we decided to do was cross off the first item on our bucket list, which was going to Paris for Christmas and New Year's. So we had 3 months to put this trip together. We were a little nervous because we don't parlez-vous français. That's about all we know. And then we had also heard about how rude the French can be. So, oh my goodness, how are we supposed to have a good time in Paris if there are rude people around us? Well, fortunately, we met a really nice French guy about a month before we were going to leave. And so after we got to know each other a little bit, I said, sir, would you please tell us what we need to know to survive this trip so we have a good time? I mean, this is a bucket list trip, a once-in-a-lifetime trip. And he says, first, let me tell you, you never start speaking to the French in English. That is rude. You always start in French. Second, you always give formal greeting, Madame for Miss and Monsieur for Sir. Third, you always say please, s'il vous plaît. You always say thank you, merci. You should always know how to ask for toilet, où est toilette. Whew, that's good. And then I asked him how to ask for wine because I thought that was extremely important to know over there. So red wine, just so you know, is Vin Rouge and s'il vous plaît is please. Well, my husband and I mapped out this path. We were going to spend Christmas in Paris and then drive up to Normandy and back down to this little town called Chartres and then back to Paris for all the New Year's festivities. And what we decided was, since Chartres was famous for its cathedral and had no nightlife whatsoever, that'd be a perfect night to do laundry, so we would arrive back in Paris with nothing but clean clothes, ready for New Year's. Unfortunately, our hotel clerk was cartographically challenged, and she did not draw the map to scale or to accuracy. And we walked around in circles, and by the time we got to the laundromat, we were really frustrated. We were also really hot because we had our winter coats on, and Being geniuses, my husband and I decided, let's wash all of our clothes. So we only had on bathing suits underneath our winter coats, and we could not take them off. We were not planning on sweating in the winter. Well, we make it to the laundromat, and we're horrified to see that all of the instructions are in French. There's no English anywhere. Oh my goodness. Well, we decided to go up to the lady with the mop, because if you have a mop in a laundromat, that means you work there, right? So I go up to her, and I'm remembering all of my French lessons. Pardon-moi, madame, s'il vous plaît, jabon? She looks at me, which we discovered is the French can-do attitude. The Frenchman we had met said, be aware of the French can-do attitude. It means, yes, you can do that on your own. So she did that, and we thought, okay. So between my husband and I, we translated enough of the French to figure out, oh, this is how you buy soap. Oh, this is how you operate the machines, because they didn't have the coin slots the way they did in college. Well, as we figured out how to wash our laundry, we noticed everybody was coming in and out, because the residents who were living in the apartments above the laundrette were coming down, getting their clothes or clean clothes out of the washer and taking them back up to line dry. So after a while, there was only one load of wash in there that belonged to somebody upstairs, and then my husband and I had our clothes in the dryer. Well, all of a sudden, that lone washing machine burst open and starts vomiting water and clothing. My husband yells, oh my gosh, you get the clothes, I'll go get the mop. So I go over and I'm tossing clothes back in, and all of a sudden I pick up the most beautiful lace bra I've ever seen that was obviously owned by a voluptuous woman. My husband looks over and says, stop dreaming, the place is flooding. So, put stuff back into the washer, close it. Every closet door was locked, there was no mop. So we're standing in this pool of water. We look around for video cameras. No video cameras. You know what that means? The stupid Americans are going to get blamed for doing this. So we did what anybody else would do. We took our damp clothes out of the dryer, shoved it into plastic bags, and ran out to go toward the hotel, except we didn't know where we were because that woman who drew us the map got us totally confused. And being bad criminals, we ran to the cafe that was just across the street from the laundrette. Oh my goodness. So we get in there, and the waiter comes over and says, you are supposed to put your coats up on the coat rack. No merci. We can't take off our coats, we're in our bathing suits. And then he comes back over, you are supposed to over an hors d'oeuvre, an entree, and then fromage for dessert. No merci, vin rouge s'il vous plaît. He started getting really frustrated, so we decided to give him the French can-do attitude. And so we wound up having a really great dinner there. But what was helpful is that I was not alone in this process. And whether you're about to be a part of an international incident or you're working on the biggest project of your life, something that's great, it is most helpful if you can assemble your team. No matter how strong and how tough you are and how fiercely independent you are, it is so important to have good people around you who you can trust, who through thick or thin will help you out. Now, Chip, I described earlier, he's the size of a linebacker. He's a tough guy. He should be able to do things on his own. But when it comes to time and getting everything done, it's truly impossible to get it all done on your own. We all need some kind of help. So you want to have your work team and you want to have your personal team. Your work team. If you are employed by a company, your work team should consist of either everybody in your department, or if you are project-based, everybody who is working on that particular project. That is your team. If you own your own company, if you're self-employed, your team becomes the contractors that you work with to delegate out some of your work. It becomes your family if you're working out of your house. So you have that work team who you communicate with. You also have your personal team. Your personal team, your family, close friends. With these two teams, you're communicating with them what your priorities are, what your targets are, what your goals are. So that way you guys can help each other out. because we all need some kind of accountability partner, somebody we can go to bounce ideas off of, and also to not be afraid to ask for help. Now for your work team, I'm about to give you a recommendation that most people totally dislike. So it's okay if you roll your eyes into the back of your head. It's totally fine. I'm used to that. Okay, you ready? The recommendation is to meet with your work team 30 minutes once a week. Eye roll. And the reason why I get the eye rolls is because people say, another meeting? That's a waste of time. I hate meetings. Meetings are stupid. And that's because of the way most meetings are run. Most meetings don't have agendas. Most meetings have a beginning time and not an ending time. If a meeting has an agenda, it doesn't have the time frames for each of the topics on the agenda, and everybody is just allowed to talk. There's no purpose. You don't walk away knowing anything more, and you don't walk away with any kind of action. When you have your work team meetings, you keep them to 30 minutes, and there is a very tight schedule. You need to walk in ready to request any resources or products or deliverables you need from anybody else in the room for the next 2 weeks. And by everybody sharing this information, you cut back on the interruptions that happen at work. Because a lot of the interruptions don't come from our clients. It doesn't come from customers calling in with questions. It comes from our coworkers or the people we're contracting with. They keep calling with, oh, what did you mean by this? And when did you want this due? And what's it supposed to look like? Constant interruptions. If you have this 30-minute meeting once a week, you clarify all of that and you cut back on those interruptions. Investing that 30 minutes 1 week will save you hours in the following week. So have that weekly team meeting, okay? Assemble your team. Now, for those of you who are still thinking, I don't know about teams, let me use a fairly famous guy as an example. How many of you have ever heard of James Bond? All the hands should be going up, right? Mr. James Bond, 007, who works for Her Majesty's MI6. I mean, the guy's incredible. He's known as omnicompetent. That means you can do anything and everything. I mean, you drop him into a foreign country and he knows exactly where to go. He needs to escape from somewhere. He can drive any car. He can ride any motorcycle. He can fly a helicopter. He can fly a plane. If he needs to shoot his way out of somewhere, he can pick up a weapon, and he never fumbles with the safety. Do you guys notice that? He never fumbles with the safety. He knows exactly what to shoot. But even Mr. Super Stud James Bond, who men want to be like and women want to do things to him, this great studly guy, he has a team. He has M, who provides him resources. He has coworkers like Moneypenny and Q who help him out in sticky situations. So even Mr. Omnicompetent, Mr. Stud, who can do everything, James Bond, he is never doing things on his own. There is always a team there. So no matter how powerful and how smart and how strong and no matter how independent you are, it's really important that you gather that team. Assemble your team. Okay? Now, before we get to asking and answering questions, I wanted to share one final story. When I was in high school, it was my dream to be an agent with the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency. I absolutely lived and breathed this dream. I watched Miami Vice because that's good research for the DEA. I went to Goodwill and I invested in 3 pastel blazers and I dressed just like Don Johnson when I was in high school. I know, not a pretty sight. I volunteered for the DARE program, so I worked with the local police department. So I really wanted to be an agent. When I was a sophomore in college, one of my family members found out about this dream and said, oh, I can get you an interview with a former FBI agent so that way you can find out what the whole hiring process is like. I thought, oh my gosh, a retired FBI agent, how incredible. So I go over to this agent's house, Dr. Say, and I sit down and I'm listening to all of the stories. He's had this stellar career. He's gotten every promotion, every raise he's ever wanted. And when I started looking around, I realized, wow, it's a really sterile environment. There's no color, there are no pictures. And after I started feeling comfortable with him, I said, "Sir, may I ask you, where are your photographs?" And he said that in his drive to get every raise and to get every promotion, he worked around the clock. He didn't understand how to streamline what he was doing and how to talk to his colleagues and ask for help and talk to his supervisors about a different way to do something. His desire was to get every promotion and every raise for his family. And ironically, in the end, his family left him because he wasn't home as he was trying to work to provide for them. And that's why that entire condo that I was sitting in was empty. And that was a huge lesson for me to learn what life-work imbalance is like and what it can cost you. And that's where understanding those personal priorities and work priorities come in. Creating that clarity of what success is to you in the workplace and success is to you in your personal life. When you understand what it is you are living for and what it is you are working for, that is going to help keep you focused and balanced. And once you have that clarity, you'll be able to implement structure and flow. Implement structure and flow. Create those schedules, those 3+3 throughout the day. And then gather the team around you that you need in your work life and in your personal life. So you want to make sure that you create clarity, implement structure and flow, and assemble your team. Time management is truly all about mind management. You can tell your time what to do. You don't have to be like Dr. Say and throw everything away. You don't have to be like my dad who took years to figure out how to streamline things. You have the power to tell your time what to do right now. So you can go out, you've broken the encryption code, you have those productivity skills in you. You just need to bring them out from deep cover now. Create clarity, implement structure and flow, and assemble your team. You can tell your time what to do. Questions? Yes?
Well, I have two.
Mhm.
I'll ask the easy one first.
Okay.
You said not to make long lists, 20 and 50 things.
Mhm.
If I don't make that list and get everything done, then I might forget about something important. Like, I forgot that I'm supposed to write a reference for a former employee who's trying to get into graduate school. So how do you, when do you make that list? And do you just draw the 3+3 from that?
Yes.
Do you want to answer that, or do you want to ask the second one?
I'll answer that first because I have a terrible memory, so I'll just do one question at a time. Yes, you want to do what I call mind liberation. So at the end of the day, you empty all the thoughts out of your head. What's floating around? What do you need to do? Did I forget to do something yesterday? Good thoughts, bad thoughts, you get everything out of your head. And then, yes, you draw your 3+3 from that list. And so you're deciding what are the most critical things that need to get done the next day. Then the next day, when you do your mind liberation, you can continue doing it on that same list. So you're going to have this monster messy list, but you keep pulling from there, pulling out your 3+3, so that way you're always working on the high priority things. And when you look at that mind liberation list a week later, 2 weeks later, and you still see the same item on there that hasn't made it over to the 3+3, you need to ask yourself, is it something I really need to do, or can I go ahead and put it on my long-term calendar? Oh, I'll do that 3 months from now. I'll do it 6 months from now because it's not a high priority.
The second question is, I'm constantly barraged by my employees who want to work a compressed work week.
Mm-hmm.
We have flex hours. They can schedule their own time
Mm-hmm.
between 5 a.m. and 10 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Get your 8 hours in somewhere, but be consistent.
Mm-hmm.
I've always felt like after 8 hours, I'm exhausted. I don't know how anybody can get anything more done in 10 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Or like our nuclear plant workers, they get to work, 16-hour days.
Right.
I mean, that's ridiculous. What are your thoughts on that?
I would say that if it's going to go for more than 16 hours, I would be highly concerned. And I would also realize that it's not going to be a full 16 hours of work because the brain can't function even at 12 hours. So it's most likely going to be closer to a 9-hour workday by the time you take out those brain breaks that you need to have. They're still on site, they're still getting stuff done, and maybe they do work better if they're working in that longer chunk of time because they're focused for that one day on particular projects. So it's really up to each individual, as long as everybody realizes when you say a 16-hour day, you're not really working all 16 hours. You're only working part of that on high brain level tasks. And if they're getting the work done by the deadlines that you set, then what they're doing is working. Yeah. Anything else? Thank you, Lucas. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Question.
Question on how you go from so a lot of these, your 3+3.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about critical tasks.
Mm-hmm.
They're high value tasks right now.
Right.
How do you create a system in which you focus on the long term? So there might be some long-term task that doesn't really matter right now, and it might not matter tomorrow or the day after, or maybe not even the next 3 months.
Right. What you'll want to do is, if you have a project and there are multiple steps involved, so are we talking project or just a single task?
Let's say both.
Okay, if we're talking a project, so I'll just use the example, create a presentation. There are a whole bunch of different steps in there that you need to take in order to create that presentation. So what you'll want to do is list out all the steps and then also list out when each step needs to take place by, so that way by the time you reach the end of that project, you have everything done and you weren't doing it all at the last minute. If you use a digital calendar, you can build in a reminder system for each one of those steps, as well as block off time for each one of those steps on your calendar. So even if it's a year-long project, you can still schedule out 6 months, 9 months, a year at a time. And remember, you can morph your calendar. So as you get closer to that 9-month point, you don't have to promise that you're going to do that thing at the exact day and time you had said 9 months ago. You just move that time block to a different slot. Same with the one-off tasks. You schedule that into your calendar, and then as you get closer, you can decide, is that going to end up being a good day and time to do it? If not, then you morph your calendar and slide those time blocks around as necessary. But you'll still be able to keep track of it because it's not floating around on some random piece of paper. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.